Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dina Vanderzam. I'm an organizer with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. If you don't already know about us, we're a statewide farm and rural advocacy group. Feel free to go ahead and like and follow our page or subscribe if you're on YouTube, if you don't already, to kind of stay up on all of our events and things that are going on. We wanted to do a special lunch and learn, Ask Me Anything today on Amendment 3, because we know from our last one when we talked to the county clerks that our November election is well underway. Folks are voting by mail, by absentee, and there's been a lot of questions about Amendment 3. So we wanted to bring on one of our experts to really help us dig into that and answer some of your burning questions. So we wanted to bring in Richard von Glahn. He is our expert today. He's with Missouri Jobs with Justice. He's one of Missouri Rural Crisis Center's longtime allies. He worked on the Clean Amendment back in 2018, and he knows Amendment 3 really inside and out. So we are thrilled to welcome Richard today. Thanks for coming. Oh, can we hear you? You might be muted on us.
Thank you, Dina.
There we go. Perfect. It's not live if there's not a glitch. So let's go ahead and get started. What is Amendment 3, Richard? What's in it? What does it mean? What's it going to do?
Sure. So Amendment 3 is an over 5,000 word constitutional amendment that was placed on the ballot by the Missouri legislature. And, 5,000 words is longer than the U.S. Constitution. So this has the potential to do a lot. But fundamentally, what Amendment 3 does is it gives political parties the right to gerrymander, and it places that right in our Constitution. Gerrymandering is the sort of art, the science of manipulating elections and making sure that you can achieve a predetermined outcome, that you can achieve a partisan outcome, no matter what it is that the voters want. And you do that by sorting voters into different districts. Amendment 3 actually provides the political parties a right to gerrymander at a level that has not been seen in this country since the late 1970s in Mississippi, and permits theoretically one political party receiving 36% of the votes across the state, but winning a majority of the seats. It's sort of that extreme, that much of a level that they want to put, again, into our Constitution, where it would live permanently. Not only does it provide political parties the right to manipulate our elections this way, it also takes away Missouri's citizens' legal right to challenge this in court. It makes it so that Missouri voters cannot actually point out that our elections are being manipulated and to challenge it, and removes judges' ability to really fix that manipulation. So that's really what is at the heart of Amendment 3. It is a constitutional amendment designed to give political parties the power to manipulate our elections to achieve partisan outcomes. There's a few other things that are included in Amendment 3 that are frankly things that Amendment 3 doesn't really do. And that is because the description of Amendment 3 was written by the state legislature. And so some things you'll hear people say that it does, and that the ballot summary will even say that it does, is they'll say that it bans lobbyist gifts. What it in fact does is it lowers lobbyist gifts by $5. The current limit is $5. This takes it down to $0. But it also creates loopholes for lobbyists who are relatives of politicians to be able to exceed that ban and still provide gifts. So it doesn't actually really provide a ban. It provides loopholes that way. And then some people argue that it lowers contribution limits. What it does is it creates a $100 deduction. Currently, state Senate candidates can raise $2,500. It lowers that to $2,400. But out of 180 legislators that are up for re-election every 2 years, all 163 in the House and 17 in the Senate, that ban applies to only 17 of them, less than 10%. And the reduction of $100 is a 4% reduction in what they currently have. So those are really two things that you will see on the ballot summary. And again, that's a summary that the legislature got to write. That's what it really doesn't do. Over 4,800 words of this amendment are about political parties and the right to gerrymander and manipulate our elections.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge. Like you said, the 5,000 words, and 98% of it is about, the quiet parts that no one's saying out loud really when they talk about Amendment 3. If you're just joining us, if you've got questions, you can feel free to write them into the comments section. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We got a bunch sent to us in advance. But, so I want to touch on one of the things we've heard from folks is, this sounds really familiar. We have already voted on this. We just did this. And I think that's a super valid feeling. Why are people confused about this?
Sure. So in 2017, you saw thousands of Missourians from across the state gather over 300,000 signatures to trigger the Citizens Ballot Initiative process in the campaign that was called Clean Missouri. It was Amendment 1 on the November 2018 ballot. And in that election, over 62% of Missourians, over 1.4 million of us, voted to actually do what was being talked about here. Prior to that, there were no limits on what lobbyists could provide politicians, and you would regularly see over $1 million of gifts flowing from lobbyists to politicians. And 2018 is what created that $5 cap, which has eliminated over 99% of the gifts that were flowing from lobbyists to politicians already. That amendment is what reinstituted campaign finance limits that had been repealed by the state legislature previously, and put those back in place. And that is the amendment that sought to end gerrymandering in Missouri and created a nonpartisan process where voters of each political party should be treated equally and fairly. And that's something that, again, 62% of voters in Missouri passed. It passed. There are 34 state Senate districts. Some are really urban, some are really rural, some are in the north, some are in the south. It passed in every single one of those 34 Senate districts. I don't know of anything in Missouri history that has ever done that, but it really showed that voters, whether you're a conservative or a liberal or a progressive or a Tea Party member, voters don't like your votes to be manipulated. And Missouri was part of 5 different states in 2018, all voted to limit political parties' rights to manipulate our elections through gerrymandering, and all 5 states it passed. So that's why it seems familiar, because it is, except this Amendment 3 wasn't put on the ballot by voters. Amendment 3 was put on the ballot by politicians. And it is really a proposal to seek to reverse the voters' will from 2018.
Yeah, and the thing I always think of is, the big will that the mandate they seem to give themselves was, people didn't understand what they were voting on, is what legislators said as they put this back on. But these are the same voters. These are, as we call them, the Schrodinger voters, right? Like, they were both very informed voters voting for these actual candidates on the same ballot, and then ill-informed when they voted on the ethics reforms that they now are seeking to undo. So it's interesting that we can be both very educated and ill-informed voters on the same ballot and the same moment as we're voting. It just really doesn't add up to us. We've got a couple of questions coming up here. Let's see. So we have one from Joe. It says the most common argument he's heard that folks are talking about with Amendment 3 is the idea of these 50-50 districts disenfranchising our rural voters but that's not what the Constitution says. So what is a good response to that? How should people answer when they hear that concern?
Sure. I mean, the idea of Clean Missouri was that each political party, voters from each political party would be treated fairly. So if you are a Democrat, your vote would have the same weight as, if you're a Democrat from St. Louis, it'd have the same weight, the same ability to elect somebody as if you were a Republican from Potosi. But this has really been manipulated by people to say that every district needs to be a 50-50 district. And that's a sort of absurd argument, because there are parts of this state that are simply always going to elect Democrats, and there are parts of the state that are simply always going to elect Republicans. And everyone knows that is to be true. If you had every district was a 50-50 district, let's say there was a wave election. For instance, in 2012, Democrats for governor and secretary of state and attorney general, they won all of those races. If every district was a 50-50 election and a wave election, then one party would control all 163 state house districts and all 34 Senate districts. That would be ridiculous. That would be illegal under the current Missouri Constitution, what was passed by Clean Missouri, because it would mean Democratic voters had a far greater ability to elect their candidates of choice than Republican voters did. So that's an argument that, I understand it's designed to mislead. There was an analysis out of Princeton that really debunked that. But if people want to try to scare or trick voters, they talk about that, but I think most voters know that that's not actually true.
We've got another question in here. It looks like we may have touched on this, but the reform for lobbyist gifts and campaign finance, since they're not really doing all that much, could this have been handled differently, done differently, versus putting them into this packaged amendment here for voters?
Sure. So, one allegation people make is that Clean Missouri shouldn't have packed all these things together. But the reality is, for over a decade, citizens in this state have been crying out about the influence of money and special interest in our elections. And that took place in campaign finance and lobbyist gift bans. And the funny thing is that a lot of the legislators that supported Amendment 3 and said, well, we need to do these things, are the same legislators who voted against the legislature just taking action on banning lobbyist gifts, or in some cases are the very legislators that voted to repeal the campaign finance limits that citizens had previously placed on them. So I think they really kind of lack credibility on these points. But to Andrew's point, if the legislature had wanted to ban lobbyist gifts or done campaign finance reform and really done that honestly, not done it in a way that created loopholes for their relatives or had such a minimal impact as what Amendment 3 has, they can do that. They can do that now. They could come back and they could say, we really want to limit campaign finance, and they can do that, and they can pass a statute to do that. But to the point of 98% of the 5,000 words that make up Amendment 3 are about redistricting. That's really when people ask me what Amendment 3 is, it's a redistricting amendment.
Yeah, that's what we said. We're like, sure, let's do it. I'm for it. Let's get rid of the lobbyist gifts. Let's change the campaign contributions. Like, I'm all in on that part. But yeah, that's a great answer. So one of the questions we've gotten in is kind of like a very simple, what we think the big differences are of since Clean had passed and it's what stands. How is redistricting going to work if Amendment 3 passes versus if it fails? What are the...
Sure. So under the Missouri Constitution, as amended by the voters in 2018, so the current process, there is a position of a nonpartisan state demographer. This is a position that is appointed by the Senate majority and Senate minority leaders. They apply to the state auditor, but they're actually appointed by the Senate majority and minority leaders. And then this person uses a mathematical formula that is designed to limit gerrymandering, to say voters from each political party should have the same ability to elect candidates of their choice. And the demographer uses math and data to generate a draft map. And all of the data that the demographer uses is public. It's open for review, so anyone can see it and anyone can challenge it. That draft map then goes to the bipartisan commission that has existed in Missouri for several decades. And that commission can either reject or make changes to the map before that map becomes final. It's a multi-step process, designed to ensure accountability and transparency around the formula and the way that the lines are drawn. Under Amendment 3, the political parties are actually given enhanced new powers to pick who they would want to be on a explicitly bipartisan commission. And, they make a point that this is bipartisan. Bipartisan is not nonpartisan. The state demographer is nonpartisan. They are not aligned or carrying the interest of either political party. A bipartisan commission simply means you have partisans of both sides on there, but you have partisan hacks, frankly, who are then, they get into a room and they have a sort of subjective criteria as to what they can use. As I mentioned, they actually have the right to politically gerrymander and manipulate elections to achieve a partisan outcome. Amendment 3 gives them that permission. Amendment 3 also gives them the permission to hide their data, that they don't have to be transparent about what they do. And so that's really the main difference is, do you have a multi-step process of a nonpartisan position who uses a mathematical formula and makes their process transparent and clear? Or do you have a partisan group of people who can use partisan considerations and don't have to disclose how or why they're making the decisions that they make? If you've ever wondered why a district line, cuts through your neighborhood, or if you've ever wondered why, I'll use an example in Missouri, from the last time, House District 50, you cannot drive from one side of House District 50 to the other without driving outside of the district because a river runs through the middle of it. If you want to know why that is, well, you couldn't find out because the data would be secret. And I think that's a real problem.
Well, so on that note, sort of like another layer to that, because the process is clearly very different. But one thing we've heard from people is, a concern of like, well, what about this demographer? Who's picking this demographer? And is that a place where people could sway situations one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, who is picking the demographer? There's been a lot of speculation about this. I mean, I will appreciate that Senator Caleb Rowden, who's the majority leader in the Senate, helped bring some clarity to his caucus, who have been alleging that the auditor picks the demographer. Senator Rowden was very clear that actually he picks the demographer. He, along with the minority leader, so the leaders of each political party, in the Senate, pick from a list of qualified applicants. The auditor does not have a vote on who the demographer is, which is what some people have been alleging, that the auditor picks this person. The auditor is simply where applications are sent to, and there's a set criteria for who's qualified and who isn't. And then the auditor provides that list to the majority and minority leader in the Senate. And so that's the ways in which the political parties and the leaders of those political parties continue to have some influence there. It's actually a process that is modeled after the Missouri Nonpartisan Court Plan, a plan that's existed for decades and is a national model about how to keep politics out of the judiciary that other states have adopted. And Clean Missouri simply, adopted a similar process to that.
And I think I want to touch on a little bit of, it's Amendment 3 has certainly made the news a lot recently. And there have been several court cases where people are confused about it. So what have some of the rulings been on Amendment 3?
Yeah, so when citizens use the initiative process, as was done in 2018 to create Clean Missouri, when citizens propose a constitutional amendment, the Secretary of State actually reviews the language that they propose and writes a summary to describe what it is that they are proposing that voters can view. It's a good way to make sure that proponents of an initiative don't get to describe the impacts of that initiative. But when the legislature does it, the legislature doesn't have to refer their language to the Secretary of State for review. They can, in fact, write their own description about what their amendment does. So not only do you get to write the amendment, you get to describe the impact of the amendment. And so, that's what they did. And that gets into whether or not banning lobbyist gifts is a $5 reduction while creating loopholes for relatives, really a ban. And so there were some legal challenges about that. And judges in both Cole County and in the Western District struck down the summary that was written by the legislature. Some of the words that they used were false, misleading, likely to mislead voters, designed to mislead voters, I believe. And the judges really came out and spoke up for the citizens to make sure that we see a more accurate description of what's on the ballot when we go in to vote in the next couple of weeks.
Even your cat is excited about it.
Yeah, the joys of live things. My cat will speak out against Amendment 3.
And then, I think we saw that too, even as this was coming through the legislature, of people admitting, on record that this was not great. There were errors in this. Better than I do, but
Yeah, that was an interesting process. I mean, the hearing for Amendment 3 in the House was done at a time that the Speaker of the House encouraged the public not to attend because of the COVID pandemic. And so there wasn't really public testimony about this, either for or against it. But the chair of the committee that heard it, Representative Miller, said under oath that he had been told by the state GOP, I don't know who in that political party or anything, but the party that he is a part of, that he had been told by them that there were errors and things that needed corrections in the draft language of Amendment 3. Keep in mind, this is a constitutional amendment. This is the sacred document of the state that we live by. And so he testified, that he had been told that there were errors and omissions in it, but that there were not time to fix those things, that they instead just needed to vote it and move it forward, which is what happened. That's a very concerning process to say we are providing the voters a constitutional amendment that we believe has errors and omissions, but we don't have the time to do it right. I'm highly skeptical as to why Missouri voters should knowingly place errors into our Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, especially because when we do a citizens initiative thing, when we worked on Clean, even things like Medicaid expansion, one of the biggest things you hear from people is nervousness about, changing the Constitution. That's a big deal that everybody takes very seriously. So to know that we have kind of thrown something in that is knowingly going to need repair feels especially alarming.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should take a constitutional amendment seriously. That's what it is. You should be clear that what Amendment 3 is a constitutional amendment with errors, and that is longer than the U.S. Constitution is. why do we need such a complicated thing? If we are not certain about it, we should really vote no.
Yes, I agree. Well, I know that folks, we tried to get to most of the questions that were submitted in advance here. I want to make sure we don't take too much of people's time. I think, there's a couple things we want to remind people that our last day to request mail-in and absentee ballots is October 21st at 5 p.m. But please do not wait. There is no need to wait. Request them now. If you know that you want to vote absentee or by mail, go ahead and get that request in with your local election authority. And then as soon as you get it, turn it around as fast as possible. We've heard October 25th, October 27th is the last postmark date to really give yourself a week to have it in. In Missouri, they have to be in to be counted by election day. So there is certainly no need to wait on that. But is there any other final advice you would give folks, Richard, as they're thinking about this or talking to their family and friends?
No, I mean, I would really encourage people as you're talking with families and friends, and if people are asking about Amendment 3, you can say, well, who do you trust here? Do you trust the 1.4 million voters that worked hard to put this on the ballot themselves and who voted for it overwhelmingly all across the state? Or do you trust 100 politicians who met at a time that they told the public not to come, who admit that there are errors in their proposal, and who are putting a 5,000 word thing in front of you and not really taking the time to explain everything that's contained in it? A constitution is a sacred document, and if you're not certain that this is a thing that you think is going to benefit you, the right vote is to vote no.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what, the way it has been written and portrayed is a lot of why we call it Dirty Missouri. So we encourage everybody to vote no on 3. Again, talk to your friends, talk to your family about not only Amendment 3, but what their plan is to vote, and make sure that everyone is getting out there and having your voice heard. But thank you so much, Richard, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and happy voting.